All right, so we are in Matthew 11. Let's get our Bibles up and ready. So Matthew 11, for me, page 1609. For the last couple months, if you've been paying attention, since July, we've been following the Jesus Kingdom mission that Matthew lays out. He's been teaching and announcing that the kingdom of God is here, but he's also working to bring it into reality, right? He's been healing people, he's been performing signs and wonders, been doing all these things. And so just before this chapter that we're about to read, in chapter 10, Jesus spreads and extends the scope of this movement by equipping and calling this circle of 12 disciples. And he teaches them and he sends them out to extend this mission. He says, go around and do all this stuff. And they're supposed to go and do all the stuff Jesus has been doing. This is the setup. The 12 are told to go out and keep doing this kingdom mission, spread it out, do all this stuff. And so John the Baptist hears about the deeds of the Messiah and what Jesus has been up to. And so let's hear what's going on in chapter 11. After Jesus had finished instructing his 12 disciples, he went on from there to teach and preach in towns of Galilee. When John the Baptist, who was in prison, heard about the deeds of the Messiah, he sent his disciples to him and asked, "So are you the one that's supposed to come, or should we expect somebody else?" Jesus replied, "Go back and report to John what you see and you hear. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, the good news is proclaimed to the poor. Blessed is anyone who does not stumble on account of me." As John's disciples were leaving, Jesus began to speak to the crowd about John. "What did you go out to the wilderness to see? A reed swayed in the wind? If not, what did you go out to see? A man dressed in fine clothes? No, those who wear fine clothes are in king's palaces. What did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, more than a prophet. This is the one at whom it was written, 'I will send a messenger ahead of you who will prepare the way before you.' Truly I tell you, among those born of women, there has not been risen one greater than John the Baptist. Yet whoever is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he is. From the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven has been subjected to violence, and violent people have been raiding it. For all the prophets and the law prophesied until John. If you're willing to accept it, he is the Elijah who has to come. Whoever has ears, let them hear. What can I say about this generation? They're like children sitting in the marketplace. We played a pipe for you and you didn't dance. We sang a dirge and you didn't mourn. For John came neither eating nor drinking, and they will say, 'He's a demon.' The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, 'He's a glutton and a drunkard, friends of tax collectors and sinners.' But wisdom is proved right by her deeds." So John the Baptist, he's hanging out in prison. He hears about these deeds of the Messiah, what Jesus has been up to, and he's hanging out, sitting alone in prison. This entire text is about John. And John was this crucially important figure for Jesus. So if you remember all the way back to last week, we had him being this proclaimer in the wilderness. He's eating bees and honey. He looks like Jumanji, Robin Williams, right? Jesus' parents, John's parents, they knew each other. These guys grew up around each other. And at some point, this guy who grows up with Jesus becomes Robin Williams from Jumanji. He goes out in the wilderness. He wears camel fur. He's eating bees and honey, and he probably stinks, all these things. But in this sense, he's this great prophet, right in the line of all these other Hebrew prophets. And they were these eccentric people with unique callings. And so John finds himself called to be a voice of all the people in the wilderness, and he goes out and he does all this weird stuff. He wears uncomfortable clothes, he lives among the sheep in the desert, and he starts calling Israel to come out and begin this renewal movement of the Israelites who will confess their sins and wait for the coming Messiah. This was last week's message. And so Jesus goes out to John, he's baptized by him, and John gains so much public attention from this, really the wrong kind of public attention. Herod, this other leader figure, part of the Roman occupancy, he doesn't like John for quite a number of reasons, and he ends up putting John in prison. And prison, in Roman-era prisons, is not exactly the easiest. Essentially, if you didn't have friends come to you, you probably die in prison. It's not like, 3 square meals a day. They don't really take care of you. You're just kind of locked in a cell, and hopefully somebody comes and takes care of you. This is where John finds himself. So John's sitting in prison, and he starts hearing these reports about what Jesus has been out doing. And so John gets some of his followers to go ask Jesus a question. Given what we know about John, they grow up together, he baptized him, he proclaimed his coming, he witnessed all this stuff going on. What you experience about, with Jesus in this encounter, what do you think the question is going to be? What kind of question do you think John might ask Jesus? Anyone? Yeah, right, like, hey, we're buddies, right? They know each other, right? You think there's going to be there's a little bit deeper question. But here's what we get. You're the Messiah, right? Right? I guess I'm wondering, are you him? Are you sure? Is it you, or should I expect to wait for somebody else? Did anyone think that's the question? The guy who baptized Jesus, saw the dove descend on him, heard God speak about him, grew up next to him, did all these miracle things he's been heard. Did anyone expect that question from John? No. One of the closest people to this point to Jesus, this is the question that he asks. In the very next chapter, Matthew's collected a whole bunch of stories of different types of responses people have to Jesus. Some of these people we know are opposed to him, like the Pharisees. And you get other stories about people who are close to Jesus, like this one with John the Baptist, and then later his own family members. And the common thread that we see is that these people are kind of weirded out by Jesus. They don't really know what to make of him. His family members are like, I think he's a little crazy. We should go bring him back home. He's scaring people. John, are you the one? Are you the guy? He hears what Jesus is doing, and it doesn't lead him to the conclusion that Jesus is the Messiah. He hears the reports about what Jesus has been up to. He's healing, he's doing these things, but it doesn't lead him to this conclusion. And so he starts to question whether Jesus is the Messiah because of those things that he hears. That's what we don't want to miss. So it's not like John has no idea what Jesus is doing. It says, when John, who was in prison, heard about the deeds of the Messiah, he asked his disciples to ask, right? What Jesus is doing somehow doesn't convince him that Jesus is the Messiah. It makes him actually wonder and question. Why? Let's look at John's words from last week. So let's turn backwards, Matthew 3, 9 through 12. Matthew 3, 9 through 12. And do not think you can say to yourselves, we have Abraham as our father. I tell you that of these stones God can raise up children of Abraham. The axe is already at the root of the tree, and everything that doesn't produce good fruit will be cut down and thrown into the fire. I baptize you with water, but he's more powerful. He'll baptize you with the Holy Spirit and fire. The winnowing fork is at hand. He'll clear the threshing floor, gathering wheat into the barn and burning up the chaff in an unquenchable fire. John saying, we're Israelites, we're good. This is what he's telling these people are saying. We're on good terms with God just because of the fact of our birth. And he's saying, no, I tell you, God will raise up children of Abraham from rocks. The axe is at the tree. Everything that doesn't produce good fruit is going to be cut down. It's burned, water of repentance. But then one comes after me. This is it. He says, one person's coming after me. And this is what he's asking. Are you the guy? Are you the one who I said back in the desert was more powerful than me, that's going to baptize people in fire, that's going to clear threshing floors and burn the wheat in the barn and burn up chaff in unquenchable fire? Because it doesn't seem like that's what's happening. I told people that was what's going to happen, and it's not. It's intense. John grows up. He's immersed in the Hebrew prophets, and he's been sent this calling in these long chains of Hebrew prophets to announce there was a day when the God of Israel would act in history to reclaim the kingdom. To send the Messiah who would be the kingdom of peace and justice and goodness and so on. And it'll be a day that brings God's rescue, but also the purifying judgment against the oppressors, the Romans, right? And John is saying, listen, the Messiah is going to come right after me. And it's going to get really intense. He's going to bring the hammer down, right? He's drawing the sword. There's going to be people cleaved in half in front of this guy. He baptizes Jesus, and God says, this is my son, all this stuff. This happens right before John's eyes. He's a witness to this. And he says to Jesus, behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. And then Jesus goes and he actually starts doing this thing. And that leads John to question, wait, are you the guy? Because Jesus has been healing and teaching. And John says he's going to come and bring the hammer. He's going to swing out the sword. There's going to be justice brought on God's people. That's what John thinks is about to happen. But John is sitting away, rotting in prison. And he hears about Jesus, and he's like, hang on. This doesn't fit what I said was going to happen. in Matthew 11, 4 to 6. Let's hear Jesus' response. As John's disciples were leaving, Jesus began to speak to the crowd about John. What'd you go out in the wilderness to see? A reed swayed by the wind? If not, what? A man in fine clothes? No. Those who wear fine clothes are in king's palaces. Well, what then, a prophet? Yes, I tell you, more than a prophet. This is what was written about him. I will send my messenger ahead of you who will prepare the way before you. That is Jesus' answer. When John's disciples say, hey, what's going on? He gives this summary of all these things he's been up to. Go backwards. I read the wrong verses. I read 7 through whatever. 4, go back and report to John. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, the leprosy cleansed, deaf hear, dead are raised, good news proclaimed, blessed anyone who doesn't stumble on account of me. Pretend that's what I actually read the first time. This is John's answer. He says, he's given a summary of all the stuff he's been talking about. He says 6 things. And almost all of those 6 things have a story attached to it from the previous sections of Matthew. If you just read a couple chapters ago, you're going to hear these stories about blind receiving sight, lame walking, dead being raised, people who are crippled, all these different things. This is the good news being proclaimed to the poor. There's a series coming next year that I just told you about, short preview. It's the Sermon on the Mount. And it begins with this thing that everyone say this word. It's the worst word on the whole planet. Beatitudes. It sounds like have attitude, like beatitudes, right? But it's blessings. This is what it is. It's these blessings. And that Jesus pronounces at the very beginning of it. And essentially summarized, hopefully you forget about this by then, he opens up by saying the spiritual zeros, the nobodies of the world, those that are on the complete outside are the ones that are blessed, that are part of God's kingdom. And so Jesus summarizes all this stuff he's been up to John. He's saying, this is what's going on. I'm a Bible geek, but I'm not as big of a Bible geek as Jesus. Every one of the 6 lines is drawn from a prophecy scroll in Isaiah. So if you look at Isaiah 29, 35, 42, and 61, it's all these prophecies about how the coming Messiah will do one of these 6 things that's listed, that he lists in here. And he jumbles them all together and creates this little paragraph. It's this day in Israel, in Isaiah, where there'd be this visit amongst God with the people to bring salvation. This judgment would purify the people, the coming of the kingdom. And so Jesus, summarizing these passages from Isaiah, what he's saying to John is, you weren't wrong. The kingdom of God is here. I'm the one who's bringing it into reality. But it doesn't look like what you thought it would look like, John. The last words he says in here, he says, blessed is anyone who doesn't stumble on account of me. John told everybody that the Messiah would bring the sword, right? He's gonna slay the sword out. Watch out. But Jesus comes and he brings this healing, this open, generous table where tax collectors can turn and follow Jesus. And from John's point of view, sitting in prison, he thinks, I was the voice calling out in the wilderness, and you and I were like the same team. But I'm here in prison, and what are you gonna do about it? You're eating dinner with tax collectors and sinners. Like, where is the sword? And Jesus says, listen, John, it looks different than you expected it to look. But blessed is anyone who can see underneath what they thought would happen and actually see what it is that I'm doing. I don't want to pile on John here because John, like last week I was like, John is amazing. I feel like I'm crapping on John a little bit. But think about it. Have anyone here ever rotted in prison for like an extended period of time before? How about a Roman ancient prison that you just sit in a dark hole and hope somebody brings you like rotten bread someday that you don't die? No, okay. Get to the kind of place where you would be, you're trapped in a prison cell. Odds are you're never going to get out of there. You were once in absolute cahoots with Jesus. You set the stage for this rise, and you said all this about what he was going to do, and then none of what you said is happening seems to be happening, and you're still sitting in prison. John's question comes from a place where he had this little movie playing in his head about how things were going to go. And that story is not coming true. And he's rocked by it. It's easy for us to sit back and say, John, just trust the guy. I don't know. It's just it's fine. Just trust him. Have a little bit of faith. But John's going through an experience that I think all of us have gone through at some point, and it opens up a question. This is a question. Think about it in your head. Is John's hope in Jesus? Is John's hope in Jesus. And kind of here's where I take this. We're going to ask a couple questions John's thinking. I don't think John asks this question of Jesus if he doesn't hope in Jesus a little bit. Like he's saying, look, are you him? Like it seems like I thought for sure. I'm kind of hoping you're still the guy, right? He's puzzled. If he wasn't hoping in Jesus, he wouldn't even bother with the question. This is why, Jesus, I was hoping it was you, and I thought it was you, and that's why I told everybody it was you. He's hoping in Jesus, but in another sense, as he's sitting in prison, he's thinking about this little movie in his head that seems to not be what's going on. The movie in his head was wrong. He actually placed the hope and trust in the little movie reel in his head. Do you sense this? He put his hope in what he expected Jesus to do and be. But because Jesus didn't do that, now he doesn't have the same hope. Do you sense this? He thought, I know exactly how this is going to happen. My hope is in the guy who's got the long rapier, who's going to start cleaving his way through Romans. This is where his hope lied. But Jesus doesn't do that. Anybody sympathize with John a little bit? Anyone nods? Good, great, grand, wonderful. There are times in your life, you have the high expectations, right? You have this great expectation about something, and it's completely not met, and it's crushing disappointment. You have high expectations not met, crushing disappointment. Anyone experienced it? Yeah, nods, good, great, I love it. But then there's other times, okay? There's other times when things happen in your life, something really small, this little. It didn't just work out exactly like you thought, or somebody said some offhand comment, and it just gets you set off. There's this negative energy all of a sudden, and you're coming across, what you're actually sensing is there's this strong set of expectations that you hoped would happen that's not being met. And you didn't even know you expected it until it didn't happen. You with me? You didn't even know you expected this to happen until at the last second it doesn't come off. You're like, well, that really makes me mad, even though you didn't know. You with me? There's two different ones. There's I have high expectations, it's not met, crushing disappointment. Then there's I didn't even know I expected this, but when it wasn't met, it makes me bitter and angry. You with me? Two different sides of this. My example for this, my friend Kyle, he's a pastor at the warehouse. My wife and I have seen 2 movies in the theater in the last 5 years. Two, I think. One of them was the new Indiana Jones movie. And the other one was Jurassic World 3, the Lost Kingdom, or whatever it was called. I don't even know what it was called. Kyle is the biggest fan of the Jurassic Park series that's ever happened. He's a huge Jurassic Park fan, massive. He has T-shirts. His kids play with Jurassic Park dinosaurs. I think they walked down the aisle to the da 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 da, to their wedding. The Jurassic Park theme was in their wedding. Okay. He convinced us all to go to see the newest Jurassic Park movie, the last one with Chris Pratt. He goes, it's going to be amazing. Get babysitters. We're doing the whole thing. So we got babysitters for Charlie. We went out. It was a Friday night. We got dinner beforehand. It was awesome. We went in, we sat down, we watched this movie, and I have a vivid memory. About halfway through the movie, I leaned over to my wife. I said, this movie sucks. This movie is so bad. It is unbelievable. Guys, do not watch this movie. It's so bad. I went into it with crazy high expectations. Kyle had really written this thing up. I was like, it's going to be great. He left the movie. He looked over at us. He goes, that was amazing. I loved it. And then a week later in a group chat, he texted all of us and he said, I'm so sorry I made you guys go watch that movie. It's been a week and I've come to terms that it was not a good movie. I've come to terms it's not a good movie. Great expectations, super high expectations, not met, crushing disappointment. He is so disappointed in that movie. Then the opposite, the other movie we saw was Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, I think is what the newest one was called. I remember I watched the midnight showing of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, the fourth one when it came out, and I was so excited. Indiana Jones, what a great movie franchise. I went in, I had the hat, I had the whole shebang. I remember leaving the theater and being like, that movie was horrible. It was so bad. So this newest one, I said, let's go see it. No expectations whatsoever. Went in, 0 expectations. I said, if he cracks the whip one time and falls and they play the Indiana Jones theme, I'm be happy. I loved the movie. It was a smile on my face. I loved it. 0 expectations. It was exactly perfect. These are these kind of expectations. You get these great expectations about sudden utter failure, and then you have things you didn't even know you expected about it, and then it doesn't meet it. What's happening is when there's an expectation, you're being exposed to hardship. This unexpected suffering in our lives has a way of revealing our hidden expectations. If we don't know about it, suddenly hardship reveals what we expected in life. It's the same as if we follow Jesus, right? We don't realize that we're banking on Jesus to solve most of our problems. And if we're following Jesus because we expect he's going to make our wildest dreams come true, there's a problem. We don't know that that's what we think until our wildest dreams don't come true and the nightmare seems to be coming true. You get in this space where you're like scandalized by Jesus and like what is he actually doing in this world? That's great, but like I'm sitting here in prison. What about me and my problems? Isn't that higher up on your agenda? This is the space John is in. I think we've been there. And it raises a question, a super honest question that we have to ask. And this is where we're going to get into the tougher questions. Why should you follow Jesus then? This is where John is really at. Why follow him if I don't have any guarantee that my problems are going to be solved, if my wildest dreams don't come true, if the little movie reel in my head doesn't come to fruition? As John's disciples were leaving, Jesus begins to speak to the crowd about John. John's disciples are starting to leave with this answer Jesus gives them, and Jesus starts to talk to the crowd about John. He knows they can still hear him. And he doesn't have one negative thing to say about him. John is doubting Jesus, but Jesus never doubts John or speaks poorly about him. He says to the crowd, "What did you go out in the wilderness to see?" He's talking about John being way out in the wilderness, eating locusts, right? This whole thing. What did you think you were going to go see when you saw John in the wilderness? A reed swayed by the wind? There's a lot of imagery when Jesus teaches in parables, but basically like, did you go out to see a pushover? Something that just blows wherever the wind pushes it? No. Look, a person who lives in the desert and eats bees from beehives is not meeting people's expectations. He's not a reed being pushed around in the wind. He's no pushover. Did you go to the desert to see a pushover? No. Well, if not, did you go out to see someone dressed in fine clothing? No, because they're not out in the middle of the desert. John's wearing camel hair. John wasn't raised with a silver spoon in his mouth. No creature comforts. There's no fantasies with John's upbringing. Those people live in king's palaces. John was never there. Or did you go to see a prophet? This is what he asked them. Right. But you saw more than a prophet. He quotes from Malachi 3:1. He quotes about the voice coming that's going to make the straight paths, right? John's not only a prophet. He was the prophet that every prophet has been saying would be talking. He's the prophet every prophet was pointing to. That there would be this great herald that would announce the coming of the Messiah and this great kingdom. And John is that guy. This is Jesus. He is him. Among those born of women, which is like among those born of women, there has not risen anyone greater than John the Baptist. Not one person is greater than he is. I want you to hear that straight up. Here we go. Among those born of women, there has not risen anyone greater than John the Baptist, but whoever is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he is. He's saying John is the most unique and privileged human beings for all of everyone that came before him in this line. Why? Because he got to play a role in history where he was not only the prophet, but he was the prophet that got to foretell this entire process. He was the prophet that announced the great day of visitation, when the kingdom would come and the Messiah would come. He was unique and privileged, but the reality was this: John is going to die in prison. He will never witness the birth of the kingdom, of the things that he announced. He'll never see it. And so Jesus' disciples were right there around him. And all kinds of disciples. We know the names of the 12, but there's tons of people following him. The names of the 12 are the ones we have recorded, but there's all these people following him. Names that never get written down anywhere. And Jesus is saying, they're greater than John. Because they were privileged enough to see Jesus actually bring the kingdom into fullness and reality. From the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom was subjected to violent people raiding and plundering it. And John comes on the scene, and ever since Jesus takes the scene, he's bringing the kingdom to places no one expected. There's this growing violent opposition that's coming from the teachers of the day, by the Pharisees. It's starting to come from those who run the temple, which is where all the seat of government is found. You've got oppression from King Herod, who's placing John in prison, who's gonna behead him at some point. And Jesus meets violent oppression eventually at well. This is what he talks about. The kingdom is under violent oppression over and over. But don't mistake the violent oppression that somehow things are going wrong or that things are off track. This is what Jesus is saying. He's like, don't think that just because stuff seems to not be going right, it's not going exactly how we think. Make no mistake, the kingdom is here. It just doesn't look like John said it would. Doesn't look like John thought it would. Whoever has ears, let them hear. To what can I compare this generation? They're like children sitting in the marketplace. We played a pipe for you, but you didn't dance. We sang a dirge, and you didn't mourn. John came neither eating nor drinking, and they'll say he's a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they'll say he's a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors. But wisdom is proved right by her deeds. He's saying, look, here's how people are responding to Jesus. This is another image he gives. They're like a demanding kid who is in the marketplace, like the day after Sabbath. And everybody's back, and they're getting their food for the week, and there's these little kids in there, like maybe beggar children, and they got their flute case opened up, and they're playing a pipe, like, hey, cheer up, everyone, it's the Sabbath. Right, you with me? Keep this image in your head. The week's just beginning. Let's celebrate. Let's dance. Put some coins in my hat. He's saying they're like these little kids that play flutes in the marketplace, but no one will dance to them, and the kids get angry. I'm playing my flute, but you're not dancing. Put the coins in my hat. You with me? Then he says, but it's also like people who play the funeral dirge, but no one mourns with them. This generation has a whole set of expectations about what John was supposed to do, about what John was supposed to be like, about what Jesus was supposed to be like. And John and Jesus aren't dancing to the tune, and the world is not happy about it. You're not doing the tune that we said you were going to do. John came. He didn't have dinner parties, eating or drinking. He went out in the middle of the desert. He wore camel fur. He raided beehives for insects and honey. And people said, he's kind of a freak. I don't like this guy. And here I am, Jesus. I'm the Messiah, the Son of Man, and I'm having dinner parties. I'm celebrating God's grace. And you call me a glutton and a drunkard. He could have said, look, I'm not meeting your expectations. John didn't meet your expectations. But instead he says, it's a way more awesome way of saying this. He says, wisdom is proved right by her deeds. I love a good Jesus riddle every once in a while. Wisdom and discernment is proved not by how much you know, but by how things actually play out in reality. This is what he's getting at. He says, listen, if you think I'm not the one because I'm not doing what you expect me to do, that's fine. But watch and see what happens. Have discernment to see that the kingdom of God is here, that the God of Israel is at work, and you'll see what's going to happen. Wisdom's proved right by the deeds. And so what's going to happen in the story? Well, John is going to stay in prison and have his head cut off in about 3 chapters. Jesus is going to face growing opposition until he's arrested and put up on false charges, and he gets hung on a Roman executioner's rack where he suffers and he dies. Wisdom is proved right by her deeds. John dies and Jesus dies. And just like us, a lot of people in Jesus' days see this as a sign of abject failure. Clearly this was a sign. A dead Messiah is a failed Messiah from their point of view. How can it be that this is where it was supposed to go all along? And Jesus says, pay attention to how the story is going to go, and you'll see the kingdom brought into reality. Some people would see what happened with Jesus and John as a failure. Jesus sees it as how it has to go. Why? Children in the marketplace, let's go back. Dance to their flute or mourn to their dirge, right? If God's kingdom is going to come, it's going to have to kick out the Romans, right? This is the expectation. If his kingdom's coming, it's kicking out the Romans. It's going to have a sword. It's going to cleave people in half. Dance to my flute, mourn to my dirge, right? Get rid of the bad guys. For them, the Romans, the Jews had to compromise to live with the Romans. But they think once we get rid of them, then we'll set up our new kingdom completely. And everything will be rosy. Dance to my flute, mourn to my dirge. You with me? But this isn't the story. Jesus says a different enemy entirely is who the target is on. It's this mysterious enemy of evil, the spiritual evil, and the way that spiritual evil has hijacked human history and hijacked the human heart, both corporally and individually. And so essentially Jesus says, I'm not here to solve everyone's problems. I'm here to be the embodiment of God's love joining itself in tragic human stories. Suffering, pain, shattered expectations, and consequences that we deal with. He's going to conquer an enemy, evil, by letting it conquer him and exhausting its power completely by allowing it to kill him through the actions of humans. This was a failure according to everybody, but not according to Jesus. It knows God's commitment to the broken, suffering, dying world is greater than we could imagine, right? We talked way back about weeds, right? He hates sin so much, you have no idea how much that he wants to redeem everything. That there's no way that we would allow sin and death to get the final word. And so Jesus' resurrection opens up this new possibility for hope, that God's love and commitment to get the final word in our lives exists. And so the question is why? Why did Jesus do that? Why did Jesus live among us and not just solve everybody's problems, right? We have our stories in our head. We want Jesus to solve our problems. Why doesn't he just come and solve all of our problems? He healed people. We've seen stories of it. Where are they now? They're dead. Where's John? He's dead. Jesus, instead of solving everyone's problems forever and ever, actually joins himself to the fate of human beings and dies with us. Why? Because it's a story about a God who absolutely loved and committed to this world, creation, and loves human beings beyond our capable understanding that we're completely compromised by evil. Jesus could have fixed everyone's problems over and over, but the ultimate result is still the same. We die. We're isolated. And what does that tell us about our question, right? Why should I follow Jesus if I have no guarantee that he'll ever solve any of my problems? Because the man that we follow was crucified and executed by the Romans. Whatever following Jesus means, it's not the key to success in your life. It's not the key to success or the key to answers in your problems. It's not. There'll be moments where following Jesus where we're surprised. There'll be moments of surprise, there'll be moments of joy about things happening in our lives that are so wonderful and so amazing, it's unbelievable. But all of those are matched by moments of following where it's tragic and painful and difficult, because that is what a human life in this world is. There's no guarantee that Jesus is going to prevent anything from happening. He didn't prevent it from happening to him. He didn't prevent it from happening to John. So why bother following him? Back to our question. If you show me a religion or a religious worldview where at the absolute heart of their message is a God who is so utterly in love with and committed to every type of person that you could possibly imagine, that he would walk among and die and do this for them. Show me anybody in any world religion who is more amazing than the incarnate Jesus, more beautiful with wisdom and grace, compassion and mercy for people. The thing that I ask is how could anyone not find that appealing to follow? Show me anyone who is as committed to you, who would do as much for you, lay down their life for you, in your wildest dreams coming true. I don't know why your wildest dreams aren't coming true. I don't know why Jesus doesn't solve every problem for you, but the thing I can say most clearly is this. We can rule out one thing with certainty. Your wildest dreams are not coming true. Bad things happen to you for any number of reasons. But one of them, the only one we're the most certain about, is not because Jesus doesn't love or care about you. Because somebody who doesn't love or care about you wouldn't live and die and do this. Whatever Jesus is calling us into, he's calling us to the cross. He's calling us to see his death for all of us, but also his life for us, the resurrection for us. And what it forces us to do is to put our hope in Jesus alone. Not in a story that plays in our heads about how our life will turn around if we follow Jesus, but actually a faith in Jesus himself. And it forces us to be open to Jesus, to doing things in our lives that weren't a part of the script that we play in our head. Things that you couldn't have imagined. And that is both exciting and terrifying. But if I'm in the hands of someone like this, someone who who loves me, who lays down their life for me. It allows me to live in a space of trust into what Jesus' commitment to me is. Like no matter what happens in my life, that we're called to the cross that Jesus bore. May we put our faith into the hands of someone who loves us as this. And all God's people said, amen. God, this morning,